March browns are a larger mayfly that appear throughout the spring on both east and west coasts. Although their hatches may not be as blanketing as other popular spring mayflies like blue-wing olives, their presence and activity as rivers warm keep trout on the lookout for this larger buggy meal. To get started, take your 3.2mm bead and your size 12 hooks from your kit, thread that onto the hook, and secure it to your vise. Next, we're going to grab some of our lead-free wire. It'll serve as some extra weight on the fly and give you a little bit of bulk towards the head. You can pull off a couple inches of this and just snip it off with your fingernail. It's very soft. And yeah, then we're going to go ahead and add it in. You can just hold one tag of it to hold it in place and start your wraps backward. The amount of wire you use is completely up to you, just based on how heavy you want your flies to be. Regardless, when you're done, if you have any extra tag ends you want to get rid of, you can snip it off with your fingernail. Or if you want to save material, you can wrap the tags just around the hook shank as well, but make sure you get them on there good so it doesn't become a sharp edge for your thread to nick later on. Next, we're going to grab some of our rusty brown 12-0 thread and just start wrapping that behind the wire. We'll do a thread base back to about where the hook starts to curve, and don't worry about wrapping in the wire yet. We'll do that later on when we go forwards. Now it's time to add in some of the materials that give this pattern its name. We're going to grab some pheasant tails out of our kit and secure them where we stopped wrapping back. I usually try to make my tail about half the length of the hook shank. And then from there, we're just going to wrap them forward to a little bit on top of the wire. After this, you'll see me just kind of laying a thicker thread base, going thicker from the front and towards the back of the fly. And that's just the beginning steps of what we're going to do to taper the pattern once we start laying materials on top of it, just to give it more of that natural nymph look. From here, it's time to tie in our turkey. We're going to tie this in opposite the way we just did that pheasant tail, so the tips will be facing towards the bead. And once that's tied in, we'll prepare to bring it up to where we finish tying in our pheasant tail. Before you start wrapping forwards, just make sure you advance your thread up to where we're going to stop, which in this case is just behind the pheasant tail that we tied in earlier. Once we start wrapping, it's important to make sure that the feathers stay flat as you wrap forward. Doing that will make the barbs on the feathers stick out, which gives it more of that desired buggy look. And once you're finished wrapping forward, you'll tie it in right behind where we finished tying up the turkey feather. And just snip those tags. Make sure you just snip the turkey and not the long tag into the pheasant tail that we have sticking forward. That'll come into play later. Here you'll see me just advancing my thread up to behind the bead. This is where we're going to add our next material, which are more pheasant tails. So this second group of pheasant tails are going to be tied in the same way we just did the turkey, with the tips facing forward towards the bead. And these tail feathers are going to be serving two purposes. One will be the legs on the mayfly nymph itself, and the other will be part of the wing case that will fold over in a second. The tips also don't have to be tied in super long. They're only going to be a few millimeters when we're done wrapping them back to serve as those legs. Once those second tail feathers are in place, we're just going to put the tag ends back with a few more wraps on top of the hook shank with the other ones. Now it's time to grab some of our golden brown dubbing mix. I'm just going to take a decent sized chunk here, spread it out, and start twisting it to the thread. That thread should also be set back from where you finished tying in those second pheasant tail tag ends. Just make sure both of those tag ends are still lying on top of the hook shank before you start your wraps forward. I'm going to start my forward wraps with the dubbing. As you can see, I'm holding back those tail feather tags again with my hand just to make sure they stay on top. Now we're actually going to lay down the legs from those pheasant tail tips that we tied in earlier. This can be a little tricky just because they're pretty short and a little spiky, so hard to deal with. But what we're going to do is basically try to split them in half evenly. I use a bodkin here just to try to tease them apart, and then lay them down on either side of the head. Once they're in place, you can secure the legs with a few more wraps behind the head. Don't worry if they're still sticking up a little bit. As long as they're not completely vertical, you'll be able to flatten them down on either side when you do this last step here. Now it's time for the last step of this fly, which is the wing case. We're going to grab those two different tag ends from the two different sets of pheasant tails that we tied in, grab them both, and fold them forward over the bead. Once they're in place and tight, you can do a few wraps to lock them in. Next, we're going to clip off those final tags at an angle, and then we can go back in with some scissors afterward and clip off any excess tags. We can also do a couple more tight wraps here to lock down any of the excess pheasant tail tag fibers. After that, it's time to grab our whip finisher and wrap up this pheasant tail with a few quick turns. snip off the tag end and add a couple drops of head cement to lock everything in place. And that about does it for this take on a classic nymph pattern. Good luck out there, hope you put it to use soon, and thanks for watching.